everyone, and welcome to today's professional development series. My name is Emily. I'm our Director of Programs, and today I have Vanessa Philbert, the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Action Partnership of Lancaster County, otherwise known as CAP.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here today.
No problem. Good morning, everybody.
So just to kick us off, would you tell us a little bit about where you're from and maybe some interests that you had growing up?
Oh, sure. So I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. And interest growing up, I did a lot of wiffle ball manhunt. You know, that's Brooklyn is you know, it's a lot of like outdoor play. So yeah, I grew up really close, big family. So my parents are from Puerto Rico, came to the States when they were young, maybe middle school age. And my grandparents came here, obviously looking for the American dream from the island. And, you know, we grew up in close proximity to all the cousins, all the aunts and uncles, and we really grew up really integrated with our grandparents. So growing up, it was like, I lived here, my cousin lived around the corner, so it was like a family block party in proximity. So when we were together, it was just, you hang out with your cousins, you do family stuff, yeah.
That's awesome. And then experience. How did you go from Brooklyn to Lancaster?
Who'll be knowing? So actually, I met a girlfriend in New York City. So I don't know, how many of you have been to New York, know New York, experienced New York? New York's a busy place.
Love New York.
But New York, when you grow up there, like I did, in an apartment, you know there's not? A washing machine. So you go to the laundromat, and it's a real pain in the... But it's part of the norm. So you pack your coche, you go to the laundromat, and I met a girlfriend, you know, we were doing laundry, we'd always see each other there, and we had kids similar age. So at that point, I had my oldest daughter, and we just got connected and started to become friends. And she was originally from Lancaster.
Wow.
And decided to move back to Lancaster because New York's expensive, and was making the move back. And she said, you should come check it out, it's so much cheaper, you know. So we came, and we checked it out. We were here maybe once or twice. And she was originally from New Holland. So let me tell you, New Holland's different than Brooklyn, y'all. It's very different. It's very different. So we moved from Brooklyn to New Holland right after 9/11.
Wow.
And we were just like, okay, maybe this is the right time. We were young parents in transition in terms of employment and really trying to figure out how we would be able to sustain a family, you know, and New York is expensive. So we made this move. And we moved from Brooklyn to New Holland with two small kids, 5 years old and 2 months old, and two people who didn't know much of anything, and no car. And we just showed up like, all right, y'all, we're here.
No car in Lancaster County?
No car in Lancaster County.
How did that work?
Oh, it was terrible. It was really terrible. I didn't have a driver's license because in New York.
Yeah, you don't need one.
You don't need
the
one.
Subway.
And I'm not trying to pay like insurance. You got to figure out where to park. So I never really prioritized getting a license because I was like, I'm in the city.
Absolutely.
So when I moved here, I was like, wow, we are not in a good spot. So there was one bus in New Holland that runs right up Main Street, comes all the way into Lancaster City on Queen. And then from there, you have to transfer to any other, you know, service that you need. So we were pretty isolated for the first few years. And my girlfriend that was here, maybe a year or two later, decided to move back to New York.
Whoa.
So then we were like, what the heck are we doing? Now we're really by ourselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were engaged, not married yet. We got married here in New Holland. We eloped, and, you know, it was fine as what we could afford to do. But I remember being a really young family with not a lot of support in the community. Like, there was no one here, not that we didn't have family support. And we were navigating a new place and a lot of challenges. And the challenges, you know, of being newly married and having small children and not having enough money. And, you know, you figure it out, but it was hard. Yeah.
So 24 years later, why are you still here?
Oh, Lancaster has been so good to us. You know, we actually ended up kind of having our roots in Leola, East Lampeter Township area. So the girls went to CV, they all graduated from CV. And it has been a good experience. I think without Lancaster, I don't know where my life trajectory would have been. I think nothing happens by accident. Everything is by, I think, divine design. And I'm sure, you know, my life story is not dissimilar, but when you're a teen mom who leaves high school, I left high school my junior year to be prepared to have a kid. So I wanted to get into the workforce. I needed health insurance. I grew up in a single family household, so my mom was doing the best she could. And she worked as a hairdresser her whole life, but she worked off the books because that's how she could maximize her income. And then she collected public assistance. So I was very familiar with the public assistance support. But I was also very aware how stressed my mom was because being on that, you're always in kind of survival mode and you're in a scarcity mindset, right? Because she lived a life like afraid when they were going to take it away. So she was always very kind of hyper anxious, kind of paranoid sometimes about like losing the benefits because she needed them so desperately to care for her family. So I grew up on Medicaid as my health insurance. I grew up with food stamp, so that's just how it was part of our financial portfolio was that kind of economic support. So when I got pregnant with Ashley, I was, junior year, summer of my junior year, and I just didn't want to have to navigate the public welfare system because I had experienced it my whole life. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go to work. One thing about New York that I really appreciate and I wish we had here in Lancaster is summer youth employment.
Yes.
So in New York City at 14, you can explore career options. They usually let you do some sort of assessment in school, let you start to explore what you're interested in, and then they have placements all throughout the summer. And there's lots of employers who engage in summer youth.
Yep.
And my very first job, I was probably 15. It was at a nonprofit organization in downtown Brooklyn. And what they focused on was engaging people who are currently on welfare to help them build job readiness skills to transition to work, right? Because the public welfare system by design is supposed to be temporary support. So they wanted to ensure that if people who were on the system could work, how do we get them to work? So I was like, the assistant to the assistant person who filed the paper clips.
Yep.
I mean, I wasn't doing nothing, y'all. But, it was summer youth employment. It was professional experience. I got dressed every day, business professional. I took the train downtown. I went to this job and provided, just clerical support. And it was my very first professional experience. But, I think it was one of the things that you got to pay attention, I think, to the value of relationships and connection. So in summer youth employment, I did my thing, worked my job. End of summer, the director of the program's like, you did a great job. If you ever need anything, give us a call. The things you say to people.
The things you say.
And when I got pregnant with Ashley, I called him back and I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I worked summer youth employment for you a few years ago. I'm really looking for a job with benefits because I'm pregnant. And his name was Jerry. I'll never forget him. And he said, let me see what I could do. And he got me a job.
Wow.
And I was doing receptionist work at another program that they ran for this nonprofit. But he was like my gateway to like the professional world. I think I earned $15,000 a year, but I had private health insurance and, it was what I needed to be able to get myself through, all my prenatal work stuff and, have insurance for my kid and money. But it's those moments of like, you never know what one thing connects to the other thing. And Jerry was one of those things. So, when I think about New Holland to New York, it's like, yeah, I started doing that. But when I came to Lancaster, it was really about trying to find a place that we could economically like survive. And it didn't feel that way when we first got here. It felt like economic struggle for sure.
Yeah.
And for young people who are, if you guys are in relationships, working towards that, thinking about that in the future, that in itself, partnering with someone, it takes a lot. You're still growing and learning. I mean, at 16, 17, 18, 20, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed, right? So you don't even know who, like your body doesn't even know who they are yet. So it was a lot of learning and there was a lot of struggle, but we figured it out. So Lancaster has been good to us because I think it was the soil in which we were able to kind of plan ourselves.
Yeah.
And, sometimes when you plant something, you don't see anything for a long time.
Yes.
But I think our patience, and sometimes it wasn't even patience, it was just probably fatigue. And we just had to sit in this place and this uncertainty and this not knowing you start to see things start to sprout, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I think we're onto something. So yeah.
That is beautiful. I really appreciate the analogy you used about not always getting to see the growth right away.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's why in elementary school, when we plant our first bean, we do it in a clear cut.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can kind of see it,
yeah.
even when you don't see it on top. It also sounds like you were introduced to the nonprofit world at a young age. How did you find yourself back into the nonprofit sector in Lancaster? And then could you also expand on a little bit about what CAP does? Because it seems like there's been...
a lot of parallels here, yeah. I would say my very first experience with service providing work probably was with my abuela. So my abuela was, I think fascinating. She was born in 1915. She lived until she was 96, which was pretty great. She was, the matriarch of our family for sure, but she was never allowed to go to school. So her father didn't allow it. Her husband didn't allow it.
Whoa.
So at 96 in 2000, whatever that is, 15, whatever the numbers are, when she passed away, she was illiterate.
Oh, wow.
But she had such an influential presence and such a heart for service that we always saw her in service to her community. So she was very engaged in her faith and in the church experience. She was always helping people. She was a top-selling Avon representative. So for those of us who know Avon is like, Mary Kay makeup. And it was like these little booklets. And my abuela would go and give out her booklets to all the people. We lived in the projects in Brooklyn, in the Guana projects. And, she had a good customer base, right? So she was an entrepreneur. There were two things that she was really clear about. One was everyone should be educated. And she would always say to me, it's the one thing she was always mad about, that she wasn't able to have that experience. And the other thing was to vote. She was very, very clear that you should always be engaged in your civic responsibility. So I always saw her in service to community in that way. And she had 7 kids who all had kids. So there's 40 of us cousins, so there's a lot of us. And she was always in service to her family. So I think service and care was something that I saw at home, with my abuela. And then I think the other profound experience was my sister. So I'm the youngest of the 3 of my mom's kids, but my mom was married fairly early, 17, 18, got married, had 2 kids. Then she got divorced, and there was a little bit of time, and then she met my dad. So I'm 13 years younger than my siblings, so I was kind of like an only child in some ways. So my sister was kind of like my mom's sister. So she took care of me. My mom worked a lot at the hair, doing her hairdressing work, so Michelle and I were together all the time. But Michelle used to take me to work with her because she used to work at legal services. So she did like advocacy work for landlord-tenant issues in Brooklyn. And she was, she also had deferred her dreams. So she was really smart and went to school non-traditional. She went to Hofstra, but she went as a non-traditional student because she was working full-time to help my mom with, bills. So she would work all day, go to school at night, and on Saturdays. So I would go with her to class to Hofstra. So she would take her courses, and I would go to her to work sometimes and hang out with her at work. And they used to let me answer the switchboard. Like, hello, legal services, how can I help you? And you would transfer people. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. But she was always in service to people there. So I think service was an experience that I saw at home with the way our family supported one another. And then I saw in the workplace, in places where my sister was working, it was people were, in desperate housing situations. And that was kind of the work that she did. So that was where it started. I think for CAP, what's interesting is that Community Action is a network of organizations. There are 1,000 community actions across the United States. There are 42 in Pennsylvania. We are the countywide community action agency. The community action movement started under President Lyndon Johnson's administration. And Johnson was famous for 2 things, and they're kind of, I don't know, some would say they're they're contrary to one another. He was famous for the war on poverty and the war on crime. And those things don't always match when you look at some of the policy work that he did there. But as it related to the war on poverty, he sent a gentleman out from his administration. His name was Sergeant Shriver. And Shriver was connected to the Kennedy family. If you know Maria Shriver, who is, part of the Kennedy family, that's her dad. He worked for Johnson, and Johnson said, I want you to go and figure out what's going on with poverty in America. And Shriver traveled the United States for months, meeting with neighbors, leaders, mayors, community organizers to try to get a sense of what is poverty in America. And when he came back to DC, what he had learned is that children are the most impacted by poverty, and generational poverty is really the most dangerous form of poverty. Situational poverty happens, right? So, when we think about situational poverty, we think about a layoff, a sickness, a divorce, a death, but you recalibrate.
Yeah.
And you've got a little cushion and you can get it back together. Generational poverty is when we think about how wealth transfers, generational poverty is poverty transfers. And what happens often is that families who are getting that transfer of poverty, it's deeper and deeper as it goes through generations to generation. So when he came back to Washington, he said, I think we need to really focus on kids. So that's why they started the Office of Head Start. And Head Start is a program designed for low-income families, but really targeted to do early education for low-income families. So when you are earning less than 100% of the federal guideline, you are a qualifying family for Head Start, which means you pay nothing for a high-quality early education for your kid. Because what they determined is that we want kids to have a head start in life by educating them, by making sure they have the highest quality of education. So that was one big initiative. Things like AmeriCorps Peace Corps came out of that work, and then community action. And the hope with community action is there would be local community agencies that were paying attention to the needs of their local community. I think there was by design, by Shriver's intention, not to forecast from the federal government what it should look like at the local level. He wanted it to operate from this place. So every community action is responsible to do a data-wide community needs assessment in their community. And that assessment of data tells us where the struggles and gaps are in our community and what services that we should be providing, what collaborations, partnerships, coalitions we should be involved in to look for community solutions. So CAP today here in Lancaster, in 2026, we'll be celebrating our 60th year in Lancaster. We started here on Duke Street and then soon after moved to Rockland Street. So people who were born and raised in Lancaster know CAP from Rockland Street, the All Boys and Girls Club. And it was a very grassroots nonprofit, maybe 20 people really focused on food and rental assistance and the basic needs. The leadership of that at that time, they had the core leadership team of this local community action was in place for 40 years. It was the same 3 guys who ran community action for 40 years. One of them is still here in Lancaster and alive. The other 2 have passed away. And I worked for all 3 of them.
Wow.
During my first stint at CAP. But they had a big vision for creating having CAP be an anchor organization for Lancaster. So through their own kind of willingness and expertise, they started to acquire major contracts with the federal and state government. So we offer things like Head Start and WIC. We support 40 food pantries throughout Lancaster County. We have senior centers. We are the domestic violence provider for the county. So they had big vision for the work. And in 2003, we moved to our Queen Street location, which is on the corner of Queen and Chesapeake. But we have locations all throughout Lancaster County. So we have offices in Ephrata, Columbia, Solanco. We have over 40 classrooms, Head Start classrooms, all throughout every school district in Lancaster County. We have about 1,000 students in our Head Start program. And we serve about 40,000 families a year. And, that was because they understood that this community needed a local, vibrant community action organization. So CAP does kind of a myriad of things, but 4 big buckets: education, health and nutrition, economic mobility, and then safety. So that's kind of where our work is today.
It's like you're reading off of my notes
That's
that I've researched.
This stuff, girl. I gotta know.
CAP leads 4 areas of impact: education and child development, health and nutrition, security. I'm like, wow, okay. I guess there's so many different things that I'm realizing are connected. One, Head Start, very in line with what we do here at Attollo. The mission of education can help you make an informed decision.
Oh, for sure.
Because I was saying this to one of my students yesterday or earlier this week. I'll be honest, I didn't quite understand people who chose a path other than higher education before I came here, because I'm from a family that 4 or 5 generations of higher education. And then since working here, I realized it's about having a plan and being educated on your options. And sometimes going to trade school is the best route. Sometimes going into the military is the best route. So I really appreciate that CAP is also contributing to that as well. Something else that I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. In the same way that your understanding of service to your community and to your family started with your abuela, it also sounds like the importance of maintaining positive relationships with people started with her too.
Oh yeah.
Even just from her work with Avon, right? You have to be able to maintain good relationships with your customers, even if you don't like them,
Sure.
in order to provide yourself an income. And that is directly connected to the work that you do now. If you want to be able to know what's happening in your community, and you're not from here, I'm not from here as well, you have to be able to build those relationships with people to understand where they're coming from. So I appreciate that, because I'm a big believer in wherever I move, whether it was during college or now, I need to volunteer. I need to volunteer. I need to be in the community in some capacity. I need to know what's going on, because until I settle roots, I'm a guest here. So I really appreciate that is something that you do. Thank you. Now, you didn't always start with CAP. You've moved throughout different roles within CAP, but in 2023, you worked at Planned Parenthood in Harrisburg. Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience and then where you eventually found yourself to CAP?
Yeah, so I actually started working at Planned Parenthood in probably 2000, what year is it? 2003. It's when we first moved here from Lancaster. So I had, by then I had 2 daughters. Ashley was 5. Andrea was about 2 or 3 months old when we moved here from New York. And, we thought we had a plan. We're like, we're going to get our taxes. We're going to figure this out. Fly. Because we got audited that year, so we didn't have our taxes. So my mom was really helping us just to pay our rent, just so that we could stay here until we got things. My husband had worked in the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, and was young, professional, but and he was someone too who was a teen dad. He started kind of picking up the papers on the floor before you guys knew what the stock exchange was, when there was actually paper on the floor. They used to have bid sheets, and you would just throw them on the floor when you were done with your bids. Now everything's different and electronic, but he did that work, and he was making decent money. And then 2000, there was a big recession, economic recession, and he had lost his job. And he just picked up whatever he could. So he was working at a local Radio Shack in New York at Central Park, and he was making good money, his commission. And we moved here, and he was like, well, I'll just transfer. I was like, right, this is fine. And then you move to Lancaster, and you realize, Lancaster and New York are not the same kind of money. And we were really struggling financially. And I started to do cold calls in taking the yellow pages. And I started to call nonprofit organizations. And I had called Planned Parenthood. One, because I was a patient, and a believer in their mission, and reached out, called this number, and was like, hey, I was just wondering if you had any job opportunities. I'd send you my resume. And this woman was like, yeah, we're looking for a director of our Harrisburg clinic. I was not qualified, y'all. I had my GED at that time. I had no college experience. I was early 20s, maybe I was 24. And obviously I thought maybe I could interview well, and I did, and I got this job that I was not qualified for. And I took the job because I needed it. And now we live in New Holland. This job's in Harrisburg.
And you have no car?
I have no car, so my
and
brother-in-law,
no license.
no license. So I get this job offer. I have 3 weeks to get my license. So I take the permit test. In 3 weeks, my husband teaches me, and I get a license. And then my brother-in-law lends me $500, and we buy an old car off someone's front lawn in New Holland. And it was a Dodge Spirit, a burgundy Dodge Spirit. And I remember my husband, we named her Chancey. It was like, chance she'll work, chance she won't work, chance the windshield wipers work, chance the windshield wipers don't work. The heat was never working, so it was like, oh, girl, Chancey, we really need you. And I drove that beater from New Holland to Harrisburg with a level of stress, because I'd never really driven before, down 283 to get to work every day. But it was like the opportunity that we needed. I was probably making $35,000, which was like great, you know. And I took this job. And in Planned Parenthood, you know, it was an interesting experience because there was a team there had been together, and they were kind of circling through these directors. They couldn't quite find the right person. And there was a receptionist who had worked there. She was an older woman, probably in her 60s. I'm in my 20s. And she was pissed that I was there. Because she had applied every time for this director role and wasn't getting it. So when you walk into a team that is already formed and they don't want you there, it's tough. It is tough. So I was in that job like, oh God, what have I done? Now, I care deeply about the mission of Planned Parenthood, and I was very aligned, I think, from a values perspective. I was a young professional, barely had myself together. And there was a woman there who was their like director of finance. She was, you know, older woman, whatever. And she just kind of like took me a little under the wing. And I remember we were trying to move and we didn't have anything. She had given us furniture, and her and her husband came and helped us move and bought our kids she was very kind. And I think she saw that I was just trying to figure out my way. And the team there was tough, and they didn't care how tough they were. So I did it for almost a year. And, you know, I got to a point where I was like, I hate it here so much. And it wasn't because I hated the work. I really was fascinated by the clinic experience. I was really engaged with the mission. It was just, I didn't have the skills from a leadership perspective to deal with that team. And their behaviors, and I couldn't help set culture or norms. I didn't even know what that was yet. So I had the director of the Planned Parenthood here in Lancaster, which used to be on Lime Street, we became friends, and she was like, hey, you should look at a job at CAP. It's closer to home for you. So I applied at this job at CAP. And it was a frontline, I was coordinating after school services at Burroughs Elementary. And I got this job, and I left the Planned Parenthood work, and that was my first job in Lancaster was at CAP as a frontline kind of, you know, organizer of after school programs. Yep. And that was how my career at CAP started. But the Planned Parenthood work was a great lesson of what it means to be ready. And I wasn't ready. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't jump into that experience. Sometimes you got to realize like, ooh, this is a stretch, and can I meet the moment or not? And sometimes even when you fail, you have learned. And I think the thing that people, and I think young people sometimes, we try to lie to you guys and say, you know, achieve everything and do it, you know, no, sometimes you got to fail. Now, what you got to do is you got to fail fast, and you can't linger in failure. But you got to fail and like realize like, what am I learning in this failing? What am I supposed to know? Yeah. So now when I coach people and I'm talking through norms and team stuff, I think about that Planned Parenthood time, and I'm like, oof, I know what it's like to be a manager with potential and not ready. Right? Yeah. But how do we support people? What do they need? So that experience, even today, still has value. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very similar to the growth experience too, right? You might not see that the failure is actually leading you
somewhere
to growth.
Yeah, for sure.
So we started as a frontline after school coordinator, and then you were promoted to program director, where you oversaw 10 schools, staff, and $10 million. What was that jump like?
It was fast, actually, and it's been interesting because that's been a little bit of my experience. I was only in my after school role for 6 months before I was promoted.
Whoa.
And now I'm supervising peers. So I have 6 months, I'm in a job, I've got 10 peers that we're all doing the same work. And then in 6 months now, I'm everyone's supervisor. So that's another big, when you think about leadership lessons, for those of you who are going to enter the workforce and begin in your careers, and then all of a sudden you get promoted. And now the people that were your peers are your reports. That balance of power and energy is something you have to pay a lot of attention to. And what often happens is that, you know, young professionals or just less experienced, like you're coming into that new role, you could be 50 and just getting promoted for the first time, right? That switch in dynamic is something that you have to steward with a lot of care. Because what I see often, and probably what I did, is that you try to really maintain the friendships. Because you want people to think you're still relatable, right? And you still want to feel connected to the people where you're comfortable. But when you get called to a higher place, that calling pulls you up and away. So I had to navigate that. So yeah, that was an interesting transition. I did that for a few years, and it was a grant funded position. It was at the school district of Lancaster. We had 10 sites across the school district. And then I took on their home visitation program, which was parents as teachers and parent-child home program. And I was just kind of mid-level managing, which was great. It was a great opportunity. I did a lot of learning. And the work was important, right? It was good to be connected to families who were like in it and trying to figure things out for themselves. And, you know, we had a good team. And we did a lot of fun stuff. I remember with the Life After School program, which was that program director role, I started like a rec basketball program for all of our elementary kids. My husband at the time actually was a custodian at Hand Middle School. And he would open up the gym on Saturdays, and all seven of our elementary school programs had a basketball team. They had shirts, they had, you know, parents love that stuff, kids love that stuff. And what we found was it was where teachers were coming to connect with families.
I love that.
Especially families who they couldn't get into the building during like the school day for stuff. They knew they would show up for basketball. And we ran a really thriving, like, you know, rec basketball program. That was just our little thing. But the kids loved it, and, you know, we made it work. So there were things like that were just like, we started parent cafes in schools and just creating space for families to come in and get coffee and donuts in the morning when they were dropping their kids off. And it was all about bridging. It was about helping to be the bridge so that families would feel more welcome, because, you know, in educational institutions, you know, maybe your family feels very comfortable in that environment because they've been there before. But when you have not had success in schools, not every family feels comfortable.
Absolutely.
Right? And they don't feel welcome. Or they just have, even if it's like a subconscious trigger of like, I wasn't successful in this place, but I got to go here because my kid needs to be here. So the role of that work that we did with the Life After School program was all about bridging and saying, we want to be a good pathway for families to have good experiences. And yeah, we were providing after school care. It was free for families. So there was a benefit to them, but it was all about being relational and saying, come in, hang out, see what's happening here.
It's that theme of building relationships. It's why I'm so grateful that at Attollo we have sports passes to go to all of the games in the county within their region.
Yeah, that's cool.
And to your point, I just remember this fall, sometimes the only time I would see students to talk about their college application was after they got off the field.
Yeah.
And it worked. I mean, it was successful, but yeah, the Saturday, I love that. I want to go back to how you were 24, 25 and in a leadership role. Because I am 24 in a leadership role.
Welcome, friend.
How do you manage I'm trying to be mindful of how I say this. One, potential internal imposter syndrome, because you're so young.
Yeah.
And even if you have the knowledge and the skills and the potential to do something, the one thing you don't have is years to back you up.
Yeah, for sure.
And then how do you present yourself to other people and prove that you're able to do the work when they just look at you and you're a number?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's authenticity is the key, right? So being authentic and like, I do have these skills. That is a true thing. I also don't have all the experience. Also true. So instead of either or, it's both and. Both things are true, right? I am educated. I have this kind of experience, not that kind of experience. But I think the thing that, you know, for those of us who are, you know, a little bit more seasoned, I'm not going to say older, is that we have to create space for young professionals who are coming into the workplace who have built a skill that they need to practice somewhere. And we have to remind ourselves that everyone has to cut their teeth somewhere. You know what I mean? So, you know, I remember when I was at CAP in 2016, left CAP, came back, and when I came back, I was in a leadership role. And I was in that role maybe a year. And then I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. I'd never been in a C-suite position before. That was my first C-suite position. But I had been working with a young professional who had known in the community, who was doing kind of that community school work. And we just became friends. Like, you know, I knew her, she knew me. And we started to have coffee, and we just stood connected. And there was just something about her that I was like, you know, I just feel a kind of a kindred spirit kind of feeling. So we would just stay connected. And I was realizing that she was at a place where she was starting to be like, what's next for me? Like, I don't know. I'm a young professional. I don't, how do I get to the next thing? And, she got to the next thing because I invited her to the next thing. So when I got promoted, I called her and I said, hey, I want you to apply for my old job. I'm going to be hiring to backfill for myself. And I want you to apply. And on paper, probably not the most qualified applicant. And we interviewed other people that were more qualified on paper. But I knew she had the right potential to be developed, to be great in the role. So when I think about like how you encourage young people to still show up, it's one, don't try to pretend you don't have the skill. It's okay to like feel confident you've learned something that you feel like you've got the skill. I would say, but be open to the fact that you don't have the experience of practicing the skill, right? So it's like, how do you create partnership where you can say, hey, I know how to do this stuff well. I need to practice it. In this role, this will give me the opportunity to exercise what I think I've learned, right? And you got to be coachable. I think one thing that's one of the most important, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Nicholas Hobbs. He was a youth development professional. He did a lot of work. Presley Ridge is an organization that I work for. And at Presley Ridge, they really hold his kind of these beliefs to be like their principles of how they work with kids and families. And one of the principles that he has is that everyone's a teacher and everyone's a learner.
Yes.
And that was one of the most profound things I ever heard, because it helps to level out power. So I'm the CEO of CAP, right? $50 million organization. We have 320 employees. We do a lot of work. There are moments in my team where I'm the learner. And then there are moments where I'm the teacher. My job is to be able to discern. And the more you practice it, the discerning becomes easier to know like, oh, I need to be quiet. I don't even know what I'm talking about here. I was talking to our finance person 2 weeks ago about something with the bank and the audit, and something went wrong. And I was like, And I remember saying to her, I was like, I need you to, she had made some decisions and it was fine. The decisions were fine, but I wasn't aware of the decisions. And I was like, hey, I need to know. And she was surprised that I wanted to be in that level of detail. I didn't want to be in that level of detail to make the decision. I wanted to be in the level of detail to learn. Right? So it's vulnerable for me to say, hey, I know I'm the CEO here, but this part of the job, I'm still learning. So I need you to create space for me to learn. And I need to see it and ask questions. And I'm going to be a novice here. I don't have all the information. So you got to like give me space for that. So whether you're a young professional or not, I think the learning part is how you get to what you're talking about. And yes, you can have the skill, but when you have a posture of a learner, you can always grow.
And even in that moment with your director of finance, it makes the conversation more welcoming.
Oh, for
to
sure.
say, oh, I don't need to be here to make the decision.
Oh, yeah.
I actually have full faith and trust you, and you're doing something really well, and I want to learn and understand it so that I can see the work and know right away how it happened versus having to sit and wonder.
Yeah.
I do want to be mindful of the time and opening up questions to the audience. And I'm wondering if you could briefly talk about how your decision to go to Albright College and actually pursue your degree and then pursue your master's at Temple.
So what I'll say is, it wasn't really my decision. So I was working at CAP at that, kind of supervising some of those, programs and doing fine. And sometimes you just get curious. So there was a job at the United Way of Lancaster County that I was like, oh, I saw this job. And it was the director of allocations or community impact, something like that. And in that role, what you would do is help the United Way take their money and appropriately give it to nonprofits in the work. And I felt like, I kind of knew something about programming and I understood families and services, so I could, apply. So I applied, I interviewed. And I will tell you, if there's one thing for me, it's like I had really figured out how to master an interview. Because on paper, again, I just had my GED. So, now I'm 30. My kids are older, I've got more of them because they keep coming. And I'm still just operating with limited credential. So the president of the United Way at the time, her name's Susan Eckert, she's still part of this community and part of my life. She interviews me and she says, we'd like to offer you this position as the director of community impact, but it requires a degree. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back at some point. And she was like, well, if you want this job, you have to enroll in a program now to demonstrate that you are getting the credential. So it was in my offer letter, it was contingent on, my employment was contingent on being enrolled. And I remember, I was like, okay, at that time, I think Ashley was 13. So, the years have flown. And that's what happens, I will tell you, like years go fast. I tell my girls all the time, I'm like, I remember telling Ashley when she graduated high school, I said, you're gonna look up, you're gonna be almost 30. And she was like, yeah, I got time, I'm gonna figure it out. She's 29. Time goes fast. So Susan pushed me and said, I think you have a lot of potential. She told me, she's like, you're not going to go as far as you could go if you don't get a credential. You need to go back to school. And I was like, yeah, it's just financially, I've got 3 kids, all the things. And she's like, figure it out. And that's all she said. So if I wanted this opportunity, I had to get to a post-secondary program. So I went to HAC and I was sitting in their advising lobby and, HAC's all good, works for some people. And I was sitting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And I look up and there's a paper for Albright College on their bulletin board. So while I'm waiting, I call Albright. And this woman by the name of Lee Lafayette, I still remember her, it answers the phone right away. And she's like, yeah, we do this. And they had a much more conducive program for working professionals. So one of the things that was a challenge for me with HAC is like the classes are during the day. You got to go 2 or 3 times a week. It's a very traditional schedule. But I needed to still work full time. I couldn't give up working and to go to school. And a lot of people are negotiating that, right? Like they're negotiating that post-secondary experience for the financial stability that they need. So Albright gave me both. It was 1 night a week, 6 to 10, 8-week semesters. It was accelerated. It was a lot of work. But I could put that in like when I thought about my life, I was like, I could fit that. I don't know how I'm going to fit HAC. Or that kind of experience, whatever the institution was, Millersville, whatever, a more traditional institution. So I walked out of that advising appointment. I didn't even meet with anybody. And I went over to the Albright campus, which is here at Greenfield, actually. And she made it so easy that I knew it was right. So I got there. She was like, yep. It was more expensive because it's a private college. It was more expensive because it was accelerated. It was more expensive because your tuition included all your books, which in the moment was like, I don't have to worry about anything. So you just showed up, your books were there, it was that. Did it cost me more? Yeah, it did. But it got me what I needed, and I did it in 4 years. Wow. So to get, to go non-traditional student and get a bachelor's degree in psychology in 4 years is, great.
Yeah.
And then I took 6 months off, and I knew I wanted to just do the master's degree thing because I was figuring that out. And it was interesting because I had been accepted to Temple for their MSW program. And I thought like every nonprofit professional, that's what you do. You go get your master's degree in social work. And I was actually at church one Sunday and the pastor was preaching a sermon called Burn the Plow. And he was talking about the story. And this is not about faith, it's more about the story. So just go with me, no matter what your faith practice is, about Elijah and Elisha, and there was this transfer of kind of roles, kind of succession planning happening. And Elisha was a prophet, and he was saying, hey, God told me about you. You're supposed to do this thing next, so I'm going to need you to leave your family business and come do this thing that looks actually terrible. Because you're going to just be with me and kind of like be my guy until God decides the times change. And you're going to wash my feet and you're going to get my food and you're going to travel with me and you're going to do all this like kind of gruddy work. But when God says it's the right time, then you're going to get promoted. Now, Elijah has a business, like he has a family business that he could be very profitable with if he stays with his family. They own land and they have a plow. So in that time, having a plow means you can work the field, which is that's your economy, right? So he says yes to this opportunity, which maybe seems like crazy to do. You're giving up a for sure thing for a thing that, I don't know. And what he does is he asks him, can I have 1 night to throw a party, a dinner for my family as a thank you for all that they've done for me? I want to give them like a feast. So he says, sure. And he says, he takes the plow that works the land, which is made of wood, he breaks it up, and he burns it and creates a fire. And he cooks the feast on this fire So this idea of burning the plow was saying, I'm burning the thing, I could never go back. The business is gone. I can only do this other thing now. And I was sitting there, and I don't know why, I just felt like, oh, I do not want to do social work. I'm kind of over that. I don't think this is the right thing for me.
Yeah.
And it was just this idea of like, I was doing the thing that I thought was the right thing, the required next step. But in that moment, I was just like, that's not it. And I don't know what exactly it is, but I know it's probably not that. So I remember calling my husband and being like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna go to Temple. He's like, what is happening? And I was like, I'll talk to you about it later, but I think that's not right for me.
Yeah.
And I ended up calling over to Elizabethtown College and saying, I'm looking for a master's degree program. What are your options? And they had just started a Master's of Science in Strategic Leadership and Organizational Development. And I was like, that feels better, because it was about psychology and leadership and behaviors and practices and bringing people along and systems and processes. And I said, I think I'd be interested in the woman. It was a Monday. She was like, get me all your stuff by Wednesday and you can start next week. And that's what I did. And 2 years later, I graduated with my master's, then I went back to CAP.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I really appreciate that your story includes not necessarily following the path that everyone assumes that you'll go on, because again, on paper, it might make sense.
Yeah.
But the reality is, with a strategic plan and you just taking a risk on yourself, you can get yourself to where you are now.
Yeah, and I think you got to trust. I tell people all the time, I even tell this to my girls, it's like, you got to know it in your knower. And sometimes you can't articulate it, or it doesn't make sense on paper, but there's something in there that's like, or like, that really feels exciting to me. I don't know why, but like, I feel like I got to try that. You know what I mean? And sometimes we try something and it doesn't work out. But again, it doesn't work out for a reason. There's something about that pivot that is going to be helpful to you. But for me, it was just like, I knew it in my knower, that I was like, something about that doesn't feel good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And with the time we have left, would anyone like to ask a question? Laura and then Valeria.
Awesome. Just amazing. You are so inspiring. Just want to start with that. Very like parallel. It's kind of cool to like hear you speak and see very similar stories that have. Has there ever been a time when you were passed up for a position that made you kind of like question your value, self-worth, that, imposter syndrome, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I think sometimes too, I don't know, I think for me what was uniquely different is that because I always felt I wasn't qualified because I didn't have the credential for so long, I never felt passed up. I always felt like whenever I got an opportunity, it was like, I don't know if they know. They're gonna find out fast. So I'll tell you, maybe from a different place. I remember when I went back to CAP in 2016, I had now had my master's degree. It was the first time I negotiated a salary. First time in my career. So I get the offer letter and they give me a number and I say, nah, that can't be right. That can't be right. First time. And I think that was the flip of that. It was the moment, because all the years passed, if they said to me whatever, I just said, thank you. So I think it was almost that. It wasn't like I got passed up, but I never challenged or stretched or pushed back because I didn't think I didn't deserve to. I didn't think I was qualified to. So whatever they offered, I always said yes on the first offer and just felt grateful. Like, I only have a GED, well, who am I to ask, right? So that very first time of saying, yeah, that can't be right. The way in which I was looking at what I brought to the table started to shift. The lens was different. And now I was like, wait a minute now. I didn't go to all these years of school. I don't have all this debt to make this little bit of money. Yeah. Like, that can't be right. And even now, like, when I first became CEO of CAP, they started me, I think it was like $125,000. And it was where they started the former CEO. So when you're poor and you're just, making it through, you're like 125. Wowzers. Killing it. And then you realize you got all these bills, whatever. So you really make $20 an hour, like 20, you're like, I am back to still broke. How is this possible? But what it was interesting was that I said yes to 125. And then as I'm doing the work, it's COVID. So I'm leading during COVID. It's hard, right? And then as I get to my second contract negotiation, I was like, oh, heck no. Because here's what I didn't do the first time. I said yes because I'd never been to a 6-figure salary. I said yes because I'd never had a C-suite position. And I was okay with my yes because I was like, this is a temporary yes. Because really, they should have offered me where he left, not where he started. Because he had been in the role 6 years. So when you think about the market analysis on that, you're still underpaying me. Because he started 6 years ago at 125 and then he left at 170. So why are you offering me 125? Well, you've never done it. I said yes. Not the second time around. When I negotiated my next contract, I was like, we're going to talk from a different place. And we did, but I had to build that confidence of saying, I know what I bring to the work. And I'm not saying that someone else can't do the job. There will be other CEOs for CAP after me. And I hope that they are successful, and I hope they have brilliant, genius ideas. But while I'm here, I am bringing value to CAP. And I have to demonstrate that I believe in my value, and even in the places where I'm not fully developed. I think that's where we sell ourselves short. It's like, well, I don't have this part fully developed, so I can't ask for too much. I did that my whole career. And then you have to realize that, like, men don't do that. Women do that. Men don't do that because men show up and they think about their future self and they think they're already there. Women show up and we're like, not even sure where we're, if we're here. So we negotiate down. Men always negotiate up. And it was just one of those things that I realized, like, the person before me would have never said yes to that number. But I did because I had to build the confidence muscle of like, I can, and here's the thing, if they say no, then I have a choice to make. And I think when we think about scarcity mindset, we think if we say no, there's nothing else. And we got to trust that there'll be something else. Yeah.
Wow. But Lydia, you'll be our last question.
Okay. So kind of similarly, it's kind of a random question just out of curiosity. So you mentioned being in the survival mode, scarcity mindset, all of that. When did you see your goals shift? And like, what do they look like now?
That's a good question. I think goals shift when I started to think about what my girls' options were going to be. I was like, wait a minute here. I don't dictate. Like, my kids are doing their thing, doing it how they want to, right? But I wanted to give them proximity to a different experience. And what I really wanted them to see is that you can try something and do hard things. And it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but you can do it, right? Most important lesson I wanted for the girls was to know that the more you invest in yourself, the more options you have. That choice is the magic word. So when you go to school, whether you get this 4-year credential, whether you go to a trade school, whether you become an entrepreneur, whatever that thing is for you, what you're trying to do is not just gain money. Yeah, it is about, you get more choices, right? So when I got a degree, now I started to say, I decide what I want. I can say yes or no to jobs. I can negotiate a salary. Without that, I didn't have as many choices. So I think for me, what I started to realize is that I wanted the girls to have choices. And I think poverty is lack of choice. That is where we experience the most poverty. Yeah, it's economic, and yeah, it's food and it's housing. It's just, we don't have choices when you're poor. And I wanted to make sure, I think thriving people have choices. And we have to figure out how do we create a life that gives us a lot of choice, right? So for me, that was maybe the big shift. I think goals for me now, it's pretty fascinating sometimes. I'm thinking about what's next. Don't tell my board I'm not looking for another job or nothing, but I am always curious about like, what is it gonna look like in 10 years? Will I still be at CAP? Maybe, if that work still is feeling good and if I can still be impactful to the work, sure. What door will kind of be open by a connection? Because I believe that's how it will happen. I think, I'm not a prescribed person where it's like, and then my next stop is, and then my next stop is. I'm always like, okay, relationships lead me to opportunity. And how do I nurture relationships? Not from a place of, I'm not using people, but I want to be open to what people see in me and what opportunities might match up for me in the future. So I am curious about what's next personally. I think for sure I have at least 3 years at CAP. I want to, one, get us through this administration. So I definitely will negotiate another 3-year contract. My contract's up in December, so I'll negotiate another 3-year contract with CAP. And I really want to make sure that, CAP is moving in a direction of not just providing services, but really honing in on our ability to be a community convener and a problem solver. So we're working through a new strategic plan that we're releasing, to our board in June, and then we'll be using as part of our 60th anniversary celebrations to talk about the way that we can celebrate the legacy work of CAP, but really think about the future of who CAP needs to be in this community. So that'll be kind of organizationally what we'll be doing. I think personally, I want to be a little bit more of a learner. Again, I miss the learning part. When you're in this kind of role, you're always teaching a lot. So I'm trying to find the ways to learn. So I've done executive coaching for 3 years for myself. Like I have a coach. It's important for me to be with someone who I can be like, I don't know what the heck to do about this thing here. Or like, I'm really frustrated by this and I'm not showing up my best self because I'm kind of over this part of it. So I've been doing that, my own personal development. Mm-hmm. I've been looking into certificate programs for public policy. I've always tinkered around with the idea of going back for a doctorate, but I think about writing another paper and I want to die. So I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can. But I figured the mid-step is like some sort of quick certificate. Like if I could do a 1-year certificate program in public policy, that'll probably be my most tangible goal. I think I'm just trying to figure out how to still, show up, clear about what I'm doing. And sometimes you get a little foggy when you're in the day-to-day. So I'm just trying to create space. And I'm taking time off. I don't usually take a lot of time off. This is the first time in the 6 years that I've been the CEO that I'm taking 2 consecutive weeks off of vacation. And I have time. It's just that I'm wired. Part of it's generational. I think I'm just wired to always be at work. So I'm trying to create a lot of self-care. I'm working out. I'm doing things that I've not done before for myself. And I'm 48, so I'm I need to make sure I'm alive. So I'm trying to take care of my body. So those are the goals. They're a little bit different than years past. Years past is credential, school, this, job, promotion. It's a little bit more about being more self-reflective, so I can be more impactful. I think the clearer I can get, the more helpful I can be.
Thank you. That was great. Very amazing.
Yeah.
So just to close this out,
yes.
I have one last question.
Quick.
That I think is arguably the most important question, and one that I know everyone in the audience is wondering, and it's in reference to our queen. What is your favorite Beyonce song?
Oh my gosh, so many Beyonce songs. Oh, Lift Up, Lift Off, Kanye, Jay-Z. Do you remember that one, Alex? Oh, don't do me like that.
Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
being here and for introducing us to good music.
Yeah.
But also just speaking to your life and to all the different themes we covered, from intentionality to combating imposter syndrome, living your authentic self. I know I gained a lot from this conversation. I'm sure you all did as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for hosting this. Great.